So in this stream, what we'll be doing, I will be talking about just what the LEQ is, and then I will kind of break down the LEQ. So I'll talk about how to understand the prompt, making an outline, going over all the components of the LEQ, and then we'll draft several example LEQs. So what is the LEQ? So the LEQ is part of the FRQ section on the AP World History exam. So you have the short answer question, you have the document-based question, and you have the LEQ. So it stands for long essay question. And basically you kind of have about 40-ish minutes to write this. So it seems like a lot of time, but it goes by really fast. So unlike the DBQ, so basically the DBQ, you get a set of documents and you use those documents to write your essay. But here you only get the prompt. So this basically, it relies on all your own knowledge. So you won't have any evidence there for you. You have to kind of think of what you know and use that in your essay. So it's kind of harder, but if you know the information, you should be pretty well. So the verbs that are usually assessed on the LEQ, and I took this from the College Board website. So they're evaluate, compare, describe, explain, and identify. So basically like evaluate to the extent, maybe like compare to empires, describe the effects of blah, 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 explain the causes of blah, 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 and just like identify. So those are the main verbs that you'll probably see on the LEQ. Last year for the 2019 exam, they were all three were evaluate to the extent. So how I generally start with the LEQ is what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to break down the prompt first. So when you see the prompts, so you get 3 prompts on the actual AP exam. So when you look over all 3 of those prompts, you're going to want to pick the one that you think that you know the most about. Don't pick one just because it, I don't know, looks the most complicated so you'll think you'll get more points, or just because it looks the easiest. Pick one that you know that you'll have the most evidence about, that you'll be able to support the most. So when you get your prompt, sometimes it might be a little confusing or it's just going to be a bit overwhelming. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to break down the prompt. So let's say you have an evaluate or a compare or something. So what you're going to want to do is usually that's like the first word of the prompt. Like it'll say like evaluate to the extent or identify an effect or identify the causes of blah, blah, blah. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to maybe, in my AP World class, what we did, we would box that so we know what we're being asked to do. Because it's very important that you know what you're being asked to do on and you're not writing the wrong thing. Like if it asks you to compare, you're not going to want to contrast and like that. So I would just box that or underline or whatever you want to do. And then you're going to underline the topic of the prompt. So let's say your prompt is like evaluate to the extent which like maybe the old world was affected by the Columbian Exchange. So you would box like evaluate and then you would, or evaluate to the extent, and then you'd underline the next part. So the Columbian, how the Columbian Exchange, how much the Columbian Exchange affected the old world. And then you're going to want to star the limitations given to you. So let's say we had that old world prompt. So the limitations, obviously you have the old world. You're not going to want to, if it asks how much the Columbian Exchange affected the old world, you're not going to want to talk about the new world. You're not going to get any points talking about the region that it didn't give you. So make sure you don't do that. The time period. So if a prompt gives you like, let's say the time period 1450 to 1750, you're not going to want to talk about something that happened in like 600 CE or something way after that. You're going to want to make sure you're in that time frame, and that's how you'll get your points. Otherwise, you might have the best evidence, but if it doesn't align with the prompt, you are not going to get your points. So step 2, list probably everything that you know. So yeah, it says here, dump all the evidence that you know. So right when you get the prompt, after you break it down, just like write everything that you know, because you might get nervous and then forget everything later. So you just want to do it all at one time, and then you can organize that evidence later when you're making an outline or when you write your essay. So again, when you dump all of your evidence, think about the limitations that you have. Again, you don't want to include evidence that's outside the time period or outside the region, or like things that are unrelated to the prompt. And with your evidence, try to be as specific as you can. Being general, it's kind of fine, but you just want to make sure that you're specific as you can, like talking about specific details from a specific empire or such. That will get you the points better. So step 3, usually in my AP World class, I would make an outline. So again, be aware that on the AP test, you only have 40 minutes to write this essay. So you're going to want to like get faster at this. You're not going to want to try and take like 20 minutes doing all of these steps, and then you only have 20 minutes to write your essay. You want to try and cut this down to around like 10 minutes, so then you get most of your time to just organize those thoughts into your essay. So the first one is kind of like breaking down the prompt, just restating the prompt. So basically just write the prompt in your own words in an easier way. So what is the prompt asking you to do? And if you can restate the prompt, then I guarantee you understand the prompt. You know what you're being asked to do, and it'll be easier to write your essay. So second, a point on the LEQ portion of the exam is context. And that's basically listing a broader event or historical development that's before, during, or after the time period listed. So for example, if you have a prompt that's asking, how did the Columbian Exchange affect the Americas, for example? For your context, you might want to start talking about like the Portuguese explorations, because that eventually led to the exploration of the Americas. You could talk about Christopher Columbus and how his voyages were sponsored, and then you could talk about how that led to the exploration of the Americas. So you want to tie your context in with the prompt. You don't want your context to be like completely unrelated. So for the context, I recommend doing something that's before or during the time period. Doing after the time period is kind of harder. I've personally never done that. So I recommend before or during. And then you want to list your kind of 2 arguments that you have. So what 2 like major points, what like 2 or 3 major points are you making in this essay? So if you have in evaluate to the extent prompt, that basically asks you how much. So evaluate to the extent to which the Columbian Exchange affected the Old World or the New World. So how much did the Columbian Exchange affect the Old World or the New World? So your main argument might be that, of course, it affected the New World. There were diseases spread, there were new crops introduced, new livestock, all of that. And that might be your main argument, but then you might also want to consider the counter argument of that prompt. I don't know, maybe you could say, I don't know, some way that it maybe didn't affect the Americas as much. I don't know what point you would make about that, but sometimes you want to have those 2 arguments. That makes your essay stronger as a whole. Or if you have causes, you might want to have 2 big causes or 2 big effects or 2 big comparisons, etc. And you want to just write those 2 down. So, and then the next one is listing your evidence. How are you supporting your argument? So you want to write all the pieces of evidence that relate to each argument listed. So in the step before, I just said to drop all your argument. Don't worry about organizing it. Just drop everything that you know. Now you want to take those pieces of evidence and categorize them on each argument. So let's say the Columbian Exchange, how did it affect the Americas? You could say it affected it by diseases. And then in that diseases category, you could have specific examples like smallpox, all of that. And then you could say like new crops were introduced, and then you could list the crops that were introduced. So you have kind of like the general idea as your argument, and then you list the specifics. And that will help you, that really outlines your essay. So now that you have your outline, all you have to do is put that in essay form. So you could just copy basically your outline, but then when you're like doing the body paragraphs, you kind of want to elaborate on your evidence, connect it back to your argument, all of that. But making an outline basically sets out your whole essay for you, so it makes it easier when you write it. So, do you guys have any questions before we start drafting the LEQ? Use something that's outside the prompt by mistake, it won't hurt. Oh, so if you use something outside, like, you won't, like, I don't know. Yeah, it won't hurt, but I guess you just won't get the point for it, if I'm not mistaken. So if you use a piece of evidence that's not related to the prompt, you won't lose points, you won't be harmed for it, you just won't maybe get the point for that. So again, on these type of essays, you're not penalized for writing something wrong. If you write something wrong, you're not going to get points taken off for it. You just get points added on, basically, for what you have that's right. So don't worry about that. You don't get penalized for writing something wrong. So it's okay if you do that, essentially. So if there are no questions, we will start drafting. So again, let me just go over these 3 things. So you want to always break down the prompt, you want to list what you know, all your evidence, and then you kind of just want to make a very concise outline. Don't make it too detailed because that's what your essay is for. Your outline's kind of like the concise version, and then you elaborate on all of that in your actual essay. So I would recommend for the outline, just take about like 10 minutes doing it. Again, don't spend too long doing it or else you won't have enough time writing the actual essay. If there are no questions, then I will start drafting an LEQ with you guys so you can actually see how the process works. So I actually have a Google Doc here. I don't know if you guys want me to link it. It doesn't look like many people are on the prompt, or the slides, so I'm probably going to link the document. So I have the first LEQ. Oops, that's the second LEQ. So I have the first LEQ right here, and it basically says, in the period 600 BCE to 600 CE, the rise of large-scale empires led to increasing regional and trans-regional trade. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which the rise of one or more of these empires contributed to increase in trade in this time period. So I know the new AP World History curriculum doesn't really focus on these time periods. So if you're confused by what I'm talking about, don't worry. But this was a prompt on the AP World History exam last year, and this is the prompt that I chose to write. So I'm gonna kind of take you guys through of like my process when writing it and how I broke down the essay. So let me just copy this. So let me actually link this in case you guys want to be on this document. So this first LEQ, in the period 600 BCE to 600 CE, the rise of large-scale empires led to increasing regional and trans-regional trade. So that's kind of like the context that they give you about the prompt, so you know what you're writing about. So, and then the actual prompt asks, develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which the rise of one or more empires contributed to increase in trade. So we're going to start with the first step, and that is breaking down the prompt. So right here already, I can see evaluate the extent. So that's what it's asking me to do. So basically, evaluate the extent means how much did something affect the other or contribute to something. So it's basically asking how much. So did empires really contribute to trade in this time period, or was there not much trade in this time period? So I can't box here, so I'm probably just gonna underline it. I'll probably do that. So now I'm gonna, let's see, what is it telling me to evaluate the extent? So it's saying to which the rise of one or more empires contributed to increase in trade in this time period. So I'm gonna probably just highlight this so I know what it's telling me to do. So it's saying, so evaluate to the extent how much. That's what it's asking me to do. And what it's asking me to do it to is these empires. Did the rise of one of these empires in this period contribute to an increase in trade? So I have that. Let's see, what limitations do I have? What limitations do you guys think that I have in this essay? Or do you guys think that I'm just open to talking about whatever I want? So again, limitations are like time period, region, etc. So what limitations do I have in this essay right here? What am I restricted to? Give you a hint. It has to do with the time period. Okay. So our limitation here is this period, 600 BCE to 600 CE. I can only talk about empires within this time period. So I can't talk about like the Ottoman Empire or the Mongols or like all of that. I can only talk about specific empires that are in this time period. So I'm gonna maybe bold this or do something, whatever, just to make it clear that you are limited by this. So now that I've broken down this prompt, I might want to just list all the evidence, get it off my mind so that I know what I'm going to be talking about. So maybe we could just, so this was step 1 right here. So now we'll have step 2. So can you guys think of empires, if you remember any big empires in this time period? European, Asian, all of that. Yes, limited trade. The Han, yes, the Han was a major empire in this time period. So let me just write Han. So this was a Chinese empire, so I'll just put China right next to it. You guys know any other empires? European. What was a big European empire in this time period? Rome, yes, Roman Empire. Roman Empire. You guys think of anything else? Yes, we have the Indian empires. So we have the Mauryan and the Gupta empires, which were in India. And we have this whole line of the Chandragupta Mauryas. Chandraguptas all everywhere. And then we also have the Persian Empire, so we could talk about them. Anything else? I don't remember if I think the Qin were in this empire, or in this time period, if I'm not mistaken. The legalistic one. I'm just gonna put them, but I don't know. I don't remember if they were in this time period. So I have my empires. So these are all my empires that are in this time period. So these are the empires that I can talk about. I can't talk about any other empires later or before this time period. So I can't talk about like, yeah, again, like I said, the Ottomans, the Mongols, later Chinese empires, the Ming, the Qing. I can't talk about all that because I'm only limited to this time period right here. So what do we know about these empires? Did they have trade? Did they contribute to trade? Or do these empires not really trade? You guys know? Anything like China? There's a really famous road in China, or trade system. Silk Road, yes. The Silk Road was huge, very huge. So Han, China, we start to see this development of the Silk Road. So we could say that the rise of the Han Empire contributed to increase in trade. What was traded on the Silk Road? Besides, obviously, silk. So we had, so what was traded? We could say like silk, spices. What else do you guys have that they traded? Luxury goods, definitely. Good. Luxury goods. I'll probably include porcelain. All of this. So the Silk Road wasn't only regional; it was trans-regional. So it was across. It extended all the way far out west. So again, in this prompt, we have regional and trans-regional trade. We can include anything that's only like inside that specific region, or we can say across regions. So I guess the Silk Road is like one of our biggest examples of this start or like this increase in trans-regional trade. We see that goods are being traded along the Silk Road to like the Roman Empire and vice versa. So we have that. That's a really solid piece of evidence. What about the Roman Empire? did they have any form of, did they have any like trade network or like trade system in their empire? Okay, so the Romans had a very extensive roads, very long roads. I don't remember how many miles it extended, but they had very extensive roads. So basically, they kind of, I guess, moved their armies through the roads, but that doesn't really have to do with, I guess, trade. But these roads did lead to regional trade. So very extensive roads led to regional trade. They traded like wheat. Let's see some examples. I don't know, like wheat, wine, etc. So the Roman Empire had these very extensive roads, and that led to trade within this region. So I guess we kind of see this theme here that we have these trade networks, like we have these roads in these empires, and those roads lead to this trade. Without these roads in these empires, we wouldn't have this vast amount of trade. So do you guys have anything else for the Roman Empire? Any other goods? No? So now let's see. I'm going to skip the Mauryan and Gupta right now because I didn't write about that on my test, but I'll get back to them after we do the Persian. So the Persian Empire was started by, or the main person in the Persian Empire was Alexander the Great. And in the Persian Empire, it was created by Darius. Does anyone know what the Persian roads are called? There's a special name for the Persian roads. Yes, their armies moved around. So I guess if you want to kind of link that to regional trade, since their armies moved around, I guess you did have this transfer of weapons. So if you can link that to their armies moving, then I would go ahead and I would say weapons. But I'm not 100% sure. Link to okay, so the Persian empires. Does anyone know the name of the Persian roads? There's a very special name for it. Okay. The Persian roads were called the royal roads. And they were created by Darius the first, I believe. And basically, yes, the armies were moved, goods were traded. They also had a postal system. I think the postal system was along these roads. We have the postal system. We have regional trade. And I think the postal system was done with horses. So they would have these horses travel around, I think, carrying like the mail or whatever, carrying the mail or whatever. And then they would have these like different stops. So then the horses would stop, and then they would have fresh ones that would like continue the journey and so on. It was like a complicated system. But these, I guess, these kind of roads helped foster the postal system, which helped like carry information and I guess carry goods and all of that. So I would, in my essay, I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure I used Han China, the Roman Empire, and the Persian Empire because these empires are just so big that obviously they would have a big impact. And then also for Han and Rome, I forgot to say that. So Han and Rome traded on the Silk Road. So basically, let's see, the Han traded silk to Rome, and in exchange, so the Chinese wanted horses really bad, and horses came from Europe. So they exchanged the silk for these horses. So that's how you can kind of connect these two empires together, because I know that these two empires traded along the Silk Road. So if you knew that, you could say that, oh, it led to increased trade because we have this trans-regional trade, as Rome was trading silk to like, or sorry, the Han was trading silk to like the Roman Empire. In exchange, they got horses, which were used for fighting. So let's see, we have the chin. I don't really think they had extensive trade. So this is what I did on the AP exam. So on the AP exam, I used these three empires, and then I kind of used this as a counter argument because I said that they didn't really trade much. So I said that it mainly increased trade, but at the same time there were a few empires that weren't really involved, and like the Qin didn't have this like extensive, I guess, trade network as like the Han did. So if you want to include a counter argument, if you think it's going to strengthen your essay, then go ahead, go for it. So do you guys have anything else to add to these evidence? Okay, so just yes, the Pony Express. Yes, that had to do with the postal system in the Persian Empire. Yes. So do you guys have anything for the Mauryan and the Gupta empires or the Qin Empire that you want to add? Or do you guys think that this is good enough? Because on the AP exam, you really only need 2 to 3 solid pieces of evidence. If you can embed those into your argument really well, it's better than having a bunch of pieces of argument but not being able to defend it well or not being able to relate it back to your argument as well. So I think we're going to stick with these 3. So we have our evidence listed. So now we can go straight to the outlining. So let's see, step 3, outline. So in my AP World class, this is how we do it. So we'd have context, and then we'd have argument 1, or argument 2, or like cause 1, cause 2, depending on what your prompt is. And then we would just list our pieces of evidence under these. And that basically composes your whole essay. So, I also forgot, you want to restate the prompt. And you might want to do this before you even list your evidence because it makes it easier. So let's restate this prompt. So it says, develop an argument that evaluates the extent which the rise of one or more of these empires contributed to increase in trade. It's kind of like wordy. I kind of want to shorten this a little bit. It's kind of, it's not really confusing, but it's just, I kind of want to make this prompt easier for myself. So how could I word this prompt, like shorten it and make it easier for me to understand? Let's say someone didn't understand what this prompt was asking. How could I shorten it so people could understand? So let's see, which the rise of one or more of these empires contributed. So we could say, how did empires increase trade? Yes, that's good. I would do that, and then I would actually include how much, because this prompt asks evaluate to the extent. So when you ask evaluate to the extent, it's like how much did something impact the other. So I'm going to use that. So how much did, let me go back to see what you said. How much did empires increase trade from 600 BCE to 600 CE? So that basically gives me a summary. I was able to shorten all of this down into this. So how much did empires increase trade? Or how much did these empires have an effect on trade, like increasing trade? Now we restated our prompts. So now we know what this prompt is asking us to do. So it's going to make it easier to outline all of this. So now we have context. So again, context can be a broader historical development or event that happened before, during, or after. So you can pick any event as long as it's related to this prompt. So can you guys think of anything that I could talk about in my context that would that I could embed into the rest of my essay smoothly? Let's see. You could talk about, so the prompt says that empires, let's go back to this. The rise of large-scale empires. So maybe in my context, I want to talk about the rise. because this, I'm talking about how much did they increase trade. So maybe I could introduce this essay by talking about these empires. So maybe I want to talk about the rise of the Han Empire. So we could talk about, let's say, when did the Han came after the Qin Empire. So the Han rose. So I'd go into detail on this more because on the AP exam, it says just a phrase is not going to get you the point. You kind of have to go in detail on this, but for the outline, we're just going to make it concise. So Han rose after fall of Qin, went legalistic to Confucianism, or whatever you want to say, anything that talks about basically the rise of this empire and like how it led to the rise of the Silk Road. Or yeah, we could say like rise of Silk Road. We could talk, what other empires could we talk about the rise of? Let's see, we have the Persian Empire and we have the Roman Empire. So we could say how the Persian Empire became big under Alexander the Great. We could talk about the Roman Empire, the transfer from a Roman Republic, transfer from Roman Republic to Empire, rise of Persian Empire under Alexander the Great. So I would elaborate more into these when I'm actually writing the essay, but for now I have possible context. So when I start to write my essay, I can just pick one of these and I can elaborate on it and we'll be done with that. So now we're going to want to list our two arguments. So basically you only really have two arguments here. You can either say, yes, the rise of empires mainly led to increase in trade, or no, the rise of these empires did not really lead to an increase in trade. And I think we can all agree that the rise of empires mainly led to increase in change. The rise of empires in this time led to a dramatic increase in trade. So again, it's asking how much. So I'm going to include this word dramatic or some descriptive word that shows that the increase in trade was a lot and not just a little. So you could say, oh, so for your second argument, you could also say that the rise of these empires led to a little increase in trade rather than just saying, no, it didn't lead to an increase in trade. So either for your second argument, you could say the rise of empires led to a very small increase in trade, or you could say it didn't lead to increase in change, or trade, my bad. Now these are our two arguments. I'm going to mainly focus on this one in my essay, but if you have time, I would definitely try and include a counter argument if you have one. So now we're going to just list our evidence. So I already listed all my evidence here. So I can just copy and paste. I'm just going to copy and paste. I'm going to this now. And then I'm going to put it under here. I'm going to put it under argument 1 because that's where I'm arguing. So we can take out this because we're not using that in our essay. And then we could take out this. Now when I go to write my essay, I already have my context. That's how I start my essay. I already have my thesis. I have my two arguments here that it led to an increase or dramatic increase, didn't lead to a dramatic increase. And then we have our pieces of evidence. So when I go to write my first body paragraph, I can drop all of this and expand on it and relate it back to the prompt and so what. But we kind of have our essay essentially laid out here. So do you guys think, can you guys list any examples maybe where it didn't really increase trade much? Like, do you guys think that the Qin Empire was really, had a lot of trade? because on the AP exam, I used that as my counter argument. I said that the Chin didn't really have like an extensive road network or an extensive trade system. So maybe if you want to include that, Chin didn't really trade much, or just something, anything you can think of. If you can't think of anything, don't like try and write something if you're not sure about it. But you could give this one a shot if you want. It'll just strengthen your essay. So that is basically how you're going to draft your essay. And again, you want to do this in the first 10 minutes. So you really don't want to take a lot of time doing this because again, you want to focus much of your writing time or most of your time on writing the essay. So does anyone have any questions so far about the LEQ process or like how I handled it on the AP exam or etc.? It's not that bad, to be honest. If you don't know anything about the prompt, then obviously it's going to be harder for you. But otherwise, I think if you know the evidence, if you know what you're talking about, as long as you can properly structure the essay and you have solid piece of evidence, you are on your way to get a good score. How long should the essay be? So this isn't really like an English class, like you have to have a 5-paragraph essay, introduction, conclusion. I mean, you should have an introduction, like your context, your thesis, but really I would say your essay should be about 4 to 5, but they shouldn't be like super long. So again, you kind of want to have this introduction paragraph where you introduce your context, where you introduce your thesis, what you're going to be talking about in your essay, like the 2 main arguments. Then, so in this essay, I have 2 arguments here. So I have, yes, it led to a dramatic increase. No, it didn't. So maybe it's all up to you on how you want to structure your essay. So maybe I would use 1 paragraph to talk about all of this. And then maybe I could use a small paragraph to talk about this. Or maybe I could break this up into different paragraphs depending how long my evidence is for each. It's like maybe I could kind of link these 2 together and then make this have its own paragraph, whatever you want to do. There's no really set length to your essay as long as you embed everything that you're supposed to. And then your conclusion. Don't make your conclusion too long. In my AP class, what we did was just we kind of just like restated the thesis, and that was like kind of it. On the DBQ, actually, for your conclusion, like that's where we include like our outside piece of evidence. But otherwise, like don't make your conclusion super long because it doesn't really need to be. But yeah, it's kind of up to you how long you want to make it be, but just make sure that you're incorporating like everything that you're supposed to. Are there any other questions? We're going to do another prompt too, so you guys will get an example of stuff that are actually in the course, because I know this stuff isn't in the course anymore, but like some schools have like a unit 0 where they learned about this. So it's okay if you don't remember this because you won't need it for the AP exam. Okay, so now we're going to start our second prompt. So hopefully this stuff should be more familiar to you. So our next prompt. In the period 1400 to 1750 CE, trade networks expanded and became global. Economic factors often contributed to this process. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which economic factors led to expanding exchange networks. Oh yeah, and also credits this prompt to Eric Beckman, one of our leading teachers here at Fiveable. He actually came up with this prompt just before the exam last year. And this is a really good prompt because it kind of summarizes a lot of what this period is about. So again, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to break this prompt down. So here, let's see. Again, we want to always start about what is the prompt asking you to do. So already right here again, I can see it's asking me to evaluate the extent. So again, how much? So I'm going to kind of underline that. So now what is this action happening to? What is like the topic of our essay. So develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which economic factors led to expanding change networks. So this is what we're talking about. Economic factors and how that led to change networks and how much it led to expanding change networks. So again, what are our limitations in this? I think we have about 2 limitations in this essay. What do you guys think they are? Yes, the year 14 to 1750. So that's going to be our first limitation. And then what's our second one? Yes, economic factors. Good. So we are only allowed to talk about this period, and we are only allowed to talk about economic factors. You can't talk about like social or political as much as you might want to. This essay is asking you to focus on the economics of this time period. So now we know our basically everything. So we know what our limitations are, we know what the topic is, we know what we're supposed to do, we're supposed to evaluate the extent. So how much did economic factors lead to expanding exchange networks? Did they really lead to expanding change networks or not really? Now we're going to focus on step 2. So we're going to just list all the things we know about this period that have to do with economics and exchange networks. Listing evidence. So what economic factors can you guys think of in this time period? What are like the big things? So maybe you want to think about maybe the exchange networks first, and then you want to relate it back to the economic factors. So what, I guess, exchange networks? Yes, you could include social or political to your counterclaim. Yes. Tributary system in China. So how did that lead to expanding exchange networks in China or elsewhere? Because you can have evidence as long as you're able to back that evidence to the prompt. So how did this tributary system lead or did not really lead to expanding change networks? States about the trade. Okay, so maybe we could list that down for now. Let's see, tributary. States. So was this really like an exchange, or was it like a one-way thing, or how was it? Was it just basically like the people who were part of the system just had to pay? Oh, you said involve them in trade? Okay. You have specific examples of these states or any, I guess, empires it connected? Because that's good, but if we can go more specific, that's what you want to do. Let's see. What really major empire do we have, or what major exchange network do we have that forms in this time period? We have a really major one that happens because of the age of exploration. So what is that one? Yes, we also have Indian Ocean trade. Good. So how did economic factors lead to an expand in Indian Ocean trade? So we have the Dutch in the Indian Ocean, we have the Portuguese. So how did economic factors, did they just wanted to trade? So we could say like Portuguese, maybe like Muslim merchants we could talk about, etc. Which let's can elaborate on that. But yes, you have the Indian Ocean trade. That's the main one of the main trade networks that are in this time period. So that's good. What other one do we have? We have another empire that forms, or we have another trade network that expands in the Western Hemisphere. So we have this Eastern hemisphere, now we have the Western hemisphere. So what, I guess, global empire forms? Oh yes, we have the East India companies, good. So we also have, we have these charter companies, basically, we have these, so maybe we could include it in here, so we could say, or we could say, actually, I'm gonna include that here. So we could talk about like joint stock and charter companies. Joint stock and charter, East India Company, what was it? The East India British. Do you guys have any other charter? That's like the only one I can think of right now. But yes, joint stock and charter companies, they were a main factor. They helped kind of, I guess, promote the expansion of these empires, and they basically established themselves in the New World and elsewhere, and etc. And they were just looking for profit. So this led to expansion trade networks again in like the Indian Ocean. We also let's see. Oh wait, we could talk about, this kind of ties in with the joint and stock companies. We could talk about mercantilism, and basically it's where companies wanted, or people wanted to expand and make profit. So more exports, and this led to this, I guess, this trade. So we didn't really talk about it, but like the Americas, that was a big trade network. Again, we have like the Europeans, they want to come. Have you ever heard the 3Gs, God, gold, glory? We have the Europeans, they want to come and they explore for profit, for money making. So we have this system, we have this mercantilist system, we have these joint stock and charter companies. So these all would work. So you think we could talk about, let's see, we could also talk about the Atlantic slave trade, I think, because what this was, basically, you have this trade network, or I don't know if it's really like considered trade, but basically the Europeans were exchanging, they basically had I think trade systems set up in Africa, or trade posts set up in Africa, and they would exchange their goods, and in exchange slaves would be brought through the Middle Passage, etc. So, and the slaves were, they wanted these slaves for economic reasons. They wanted these slaves for plantations, so they could maximize profits, all of that. So these kind of all like tie in, sort of, so we could talk about the Atlantic Ocean, plus slave trade, Europeans wanted to maximize profits, so got slaves. So took slaves to the Americas. So they took, let me just shorten this down. And they just traded goods back with the African empires. So here, I guess we have some solid piece of evidence. It's kind of like all over the place right now, but that's kind of what our essay's for. Here we just jotted down all the ideas that came to our mind. Do you guys have anything else that we could use, like economic factors that led to this like expansion in trade? Do you guys think that's good enough? And then actually last year on the AP exam, the DEQ was about the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. So it's kind of, Indian Ocean's a pretty important trade network, and same with like all of these, like this Atlantic Ocean, slave trade, all these economic systems are important. So now we have our evidence just jotted down. If you guys have anything else, feel free to just list it and then I'll add it to my notes. So now what we want to do is we want to make an outline. So we're going to want to restate the prompt. And again, maybe you want to restate the prompt at the beginning before you do all this, so it makes it easier. So this asks, develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which economic factors led to expanding exchange networks. So we could be like, how much, so I could start off with how much or to what extent, So that's just how I restate it. And if you feel like you don't need to restate the prompt, if you feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, then you can skip this step if it saves you time, because this basically is just saying what this said right here. So I don't think I would restate the prompt if this was on a test, but again, it's all up to you, whatever makes it easier. So now we want to talk about context. So what can we talk about during this time period that kind of leads to this, or like we can embed with this? So not something that's completely irrelevant, but something connected or like related to the prompts. So how did this all happen? How did we get this ability to, I guess, expand our exchange networks, or what did we have? What tools did we have? What did we do that allowed us to get here, basically? You guys have any idea, anything that we could probably use for context? So the first thing that pops up to my mind is because when I really think about expanding exchange networks, I mainly think about the Americas, and I mainly think about Europe, and I mainly think about that too, because that was one of the biggest ones in this time period and one that formed. So maybe we could talk about, again, this like age of exploration, because the exploration was eventually what led to this. So we could talk about Portuguese initial, because they were the first ones who started these voyages. Columbus discovering blah blah blah. So we can talk about that because that eventually led to this, I guess, the formation of these systems where people wanted these slaves and people wanted to maximize profits. It led to like the setting up of colonies and these joint and charter companies in these colonies and all of that. So this is a big idea that we could probably use. We could talk about maybe new technology, or like new tools. Maybe we had this, I guess the compass was established a bit earlier, but that helps with navigation. We could talk about the caravel. These were ships that led to this like travel that allowed the Europeans to travel. So we could the astro, I think, is it? I don't know if the astrolabe. I don't know. But I would mainly talk about these two. And I think that's what I did on my DBQ last year, because it talked about something with like how much did like the Portuguese like affect or like impact, I guess, the Indian Ocean trade or something. So I talked about like how was that even possible. I talked about like new technology, like the compass, the caravel, all of that. So that relates to that. Anything else that we could probably put here that would relate to our prompt better? Okay. So we'll just leave it at here for now. Again, you only need one piece of context. So as long as you're able to expand on this, I would probably choose this one, because I feel like it's really important if you're gonna want to talk about the Americas. Yes, so those are two pieces of context. And then I'm gonna kind of rush up the next parts because we're running out of time. So again, we're gonna have our argument 1, and then we're going to have argument 2. So we could say economic factors heavily really low. We could just say heavily expanded exchange networks or led to these expanding change networks. Or we could say like economic factors didn't really have an impact, but again, you're probably going to argue more for this side. And again, for your counter argument, you could talk about social or political effects. So maybe you want to talk about maybe social or political effects. Slavery could technically kind of be, you could kind of make it social if you're talking about like race and all of that, but for the most part, it's an economic system. So if you want to talk about like other social, political factors that led to expanding exchange networks, or if you want to kind of argue the opposite, that economic factors didn't really expand exchange networks, if you have evidence, of course, to back it up. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to take the evidence that we listed above and we're going to organize them into the argument so that when we write our essay, we know what. So we can just copy all of this. And just put it right here. And then here, if you have time, you can put social or political factors in here. Otherwise, you might not have to do this in your outline. You could probably just do it at the end of your essay if you have time. So this is basically how, in my AP Worlds class, we kind of tackle the LEQ, how we break it down, how we make it easier for ourselves, because if you go into the LEQ without really making an outline, your thoughts are just going to all be jumbled in your brain. You're not going to really have your thoughts organized. So if you write down all of this and you organize all your thoughts, trust me, it'll be so much easier to write the LEQ. And same with the DBQ. Also do this with the DBQ. It really helps. I promise you. Do you guys have any other questions about the LEQ or like anything in general about the AP exam, AP World History, anything you're worried about? And also the key to being like successful on these is again just practice. The more you practice, the better you get at these type of prompts. And it's also a lot about just remembering the information. So just make sure you study a lot, and I think you should be perfectly fine on the LEQs. So any questions? Like how my experience was, any of that? Okay. Well, I think that's all for this stream. I really hope you guys learned something from this. I hope you guys like use the outline techniques or like breaking down the prompts because they really do make it easier to write the LEQ. So I hope you guys learned something. Again, the slides are linked here if you ever want to reference back to them. And then I have the document linked somewhere in this chat if you just want to look through it. But otherwise, that's it for this stream. I will see you guys in my next stream. Thank you so much for joining the stream.